Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat. I'm with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
The Grand Highway is crowded with lovers and searchers and leavers, so eager to please and forget. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen. I appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. And I had a friend that was going to come on and speak to you about the Mazzaroth and talk about how the constellations they tell a story, that there's all of the different signs of the zodiac, how all of them together, when you understand the background behind them, they tell a story that helps one to understand the course, the destiny, the fate of humanity and world. And as far as the prophetic nature and our being last generation and all that. But she I haven't spoken to her today, and so we're not going to cover that this evening. And so I thought what I would do is take some phone calls from you and give you as a listening audience a chance to talk about some of the happenings, those things which are cited to occur in this month. Supposedly, this month is supposed to be a lot of events are portend to occur over this month, and some of those people believe that there might be some kind of celestial event, that there is a possible comet impact, or and I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but and this is not the only thing, but there's some discussion out there in the conspiracy world that some people actually believe that this is going to happen, and that there are things like the Simpsons episode and other things that people feel like that this kind of thing is going to happen, and that it's right around the corner. And you know that I'm not one of those that gets involved in the whole gloom and doom as far as the world's gonna end. Not Chicken Little, running around screaming the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And even though I prophetically believe that things are going to continue to get difficult for humanity, and that there's certainly no golden age waiting around the corner or the bend. I hope that there is, but according to not just the biblical scriptures, because I study all things, that even like with the Colburn Bible and other books, the Hopi prophecies, things of that nature, it seems to point to things becoming difficult before we ever are to reach a point where we have peace and joy and goodwill and nothing to sweat and nothing to really have to worry about, even with the pressing debt that at some point all of that is going to come due. That things are being pushed and strung along, that the politicians and governments, we just had, I believe it was the state government of Puerto Rico, even though Puerto Rico is not a state, but the regional government of that island, it went bankrupt. And we have all of many of uh, the European nations having difficult times in managing their fiscal debt. Welcome, Lady Horse and Mr. Rowe and Herbal and Daku and Olive and Crystallize and Monster and Truthy, Zippy, Count Cranula, Olive, Cortec, Causation, all the rest of you that are in the chat room that are not in the immediate scroll. Welcome and thank you for joining us. And so, those of you that have some idea as to possibilities, let's talk about it. Let's see what you know. This will give you an opportunity to inform the rest of the community here on things you might have read or studied or know about. I personally have been focused, with a one-track mind and with all of my effort on the newest book that I've been working on, and I am glad to announce that I'm close to being done with it. That I have been numbering and formatting the chapters even today, and currently it is about 400 pages. If you consider the size of my other books, which are a 6x9 format, but I've decided, hello Noreen, I've decided to publish it in 14-point font and to utilize letter size pages, which is 8.5 by 11.5, I believe. And formatting it in that way, it's 200 plus pages. And so it won't be long at all. Anyways, so I've got a couple things that I will talk about in connection to some of the, supposed possibilities as far as events that could occur. I've got a number, because in the last book that I was working on prior to this one, okay, just a few minutes, Olive, and you're welcome to call in, brother, and just give me a chance to talk about a couple things, and then I'll take calls for those that are interested. But anyways, and so in the last book that I was working on prior to this one, it was based on the war in heaven, and I had compiled from a lot of a myriad number of sources, um, speaking about the last days, different things that talked about the last days, the final generation, the end of days, all of that. And some of those sources, and many of them were, non-biblical, things like the Hopi prophecies on the return of the blue and red star Kachina, the discussion of the destroyer, which is found in the Colburn Bible, that talks about, um, well, basically, same as the blue and red star Kachina talks about this particular celestial object that many believe will have part to play in the end of days and the wrath of God being poured out on humanity, those not written into the book of life, um, that there are other, even the Bible speaks of wormwood and talks about this mountain being uh, falling into the sea, and how 1/3 of the ships are destroyed, 1/3 of the creatures in the seas and the oceans die. That there's, association as far as the waters turning blood red, um, things like that. And there's also in the scriptures it speaks of the stars being cast out of heaven and being cast down to the earth. And many people believe that stars are also reference to. You're welcome, Truthy. It's an honor to have this kind of a platform to speak with all of you and to share the information that I've learned in studying and reading all of the different texts that I have. And so it's a blessing for me to be able to fellowship with all of you in the manner that we do here. Hello, Wild Bob and Manitou and Dirt Engineer, all the rest of you that are coming in. I see you. Um, and so, yeah, it's a huge blessing to have Revolution Radio as a platform to talk about the things that we've all come to know and to share. And also, I wanted to talk a little bit this evening about some of the deceptions that are tied in with, the New World Order, the secret societies, the controlled opposition that they utilize as way to guide and direct the particular occurrences as they unfold in world, and how it's important for peoples and countries to be aware of the modus operandi of the New World Orders and the New World Order elites that um, that fund both sides of wars and uh, like civil wars in countries. Hello, Hemp. Good to see you, and welcome, Wild Bob. Um, and so, and just to give you an example, it's like, and I know that many of you are aware of this. I guess what I'll do is I'll read from this one article in this first part of the show and talk about this, and then we'll see where it leads. But this is an interesting article that was just recently released, and it basically is referencing the same thing that I've been talking about for a very long time on this show and others, in trying to help people to make sense of um, how it is that the New World Order plays us and how they use false flag events in order to stir the pot, to incite peoples, to as pretext to create endless wars and to invade, to get reason for the invasion of certain countries, even like with what's going on in Syria, which this particular article is written specifically for what's going on in Syria. And so I'll read it and then we'll talk about some of the particulars, and then I'll relate it to some of the other wars and false flag occurrences and um, events, occurrences that have happened around the world, and to some of the history that has happened, so that especially for those that don't know and are not familiar um, with the controlled opposition and how the New World Order leads these secret societies, how they, you know, basically pull the wool over our eyes and they deceive peoples into um, supporting their agenda. And I really feel for veterans, our veterans, because so many did, and I didn't. At the time when 9/11 occurred, I didn't understand um, or know about these particular things, and I think that not many really did. It wasn't until after the events of 9/11 and um, that was such a catalyst for many people's awakening, and so many wanted to know about the details of those events. And we had the availability of the internet at that time, that um, that it was the reason that led to so many of us waking up and digging deeper into, you know, just going down the rabbit hole and learning so much more and having so many more questions and so many more answers. Um, that, this was one of the catalysts for people finally getting it. And so let me start with this, and then after I get through this article, or after the first part of the show, Olive, if you want to call in, that would be great. All right, the name of the article is "Secret Pentagon Report Reveals the U.S. Created ISIS as a Tool to Overthrow Syria's President Assad," which we've been telling people that for so long now. All right, it says this. From the first sudden and quite dramatic appearance of the fanatical Islamic group known as ISIS, which was largely unheard of until a year ago on the world stage, and which promptly replaced the worn out and tired Al Qaeda as the world's terrorist boogeyman, we suggested that the straight to beheading YouTube clip purpose behind the Saudi Arabia funded Islamic State was a simple one. Use the jihadists as the vehicle of choice to achieve a political goal. Depose of Syria's President Assad, who for years has stood in the way of a critical Qatari natural gas pipeline, one which could dethrone Russia as Europe's dominant and belligerent source of energy, reaching an interim climax with the unsuccessful Mediterranean Sea military buildup of 2013, which nearly resulted in quasi-world war. Um, this was the same thing that occurred in Afghanistan, and one of the reasons why Afghanistan was targeted. The Taliban refused to allow a pipeline to be built through the territory, which would allow the transnational um, oil barons, the oil companies, to gain access to the oil and natural gas in the Balkan area, like Tajikistan and Kazakhstan and all those different stands there in the, in the middle of Russia and Europe, in that area. And because they refused to do so, that was one of the reasons why 9/11 was used as a pretext to go into Afghanistan as well as in Iraq. Because at that time there was a Cheney Energy report that was done, which spoke of and gave a great detailed assessment of how Iraq, how it was had the second greatest oil reserves um, of anywhere in the world, and they wanted to gain access to the oil as well as to gain access to the artifacts which are found in both regions of the world. Because the cultures, the ancient civilizations, the fallen angels had been centered there for a very long time, and there were technologies. Um, there was a story not long ago that talked about how there was a Vimana, which is one of these from the Mahabharata or the Rig Veda, one of those ancient Hindu texts. The Vimana is, basically a UFO, unidentified flying object, one of these vehicles that the rebel angels utilized in ancient times, and how they had discovered one of these things in a cave in Afghanistan, and they were trying to secure it, and many soldiers died in that effort. And whether they ever succeeded, I have no idea. But a lot of stories have come to light talking about these kind of things. All right, but let me continue because I'm running out of time. All right. If the West bombs Islamic State militants in Syria without consulting Damascus, Live Leak reports that the anti-ISIS alliance may use the occasion to launch airstrikes against President Bashar Assad's forces, according to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, clearly comprehending that Obama's new strategy against ISIS in Syria is all about pushing the Qatar pipeline through. It's funny because he won't even allow the Keystone pipeline to be built here in the United States, but that's a whole different thing. Russia is pushing back, noting that it is using ISIS as a pretext for bombing Syrian government forces, and warning that such a development would lead to a huge escalation of conflict in the Middle East and North Africa. Um, Also, I just want to really quick mention that again, the divisiveness, the America against Russia and the Islamic countries against Christianity and Israel as a Zionist state, that all of that is, fabricated. It's made up. Um, and that Obama had, I don't know if you heard about this, but he gave over four huge islands in the surrounding areas up there near Alaska, just turned them over to Russia. It was like billions and trillions of dollars worth of natural resources, which could have gone a long way to, to settling some of our debt. Just turned them over with the, stroke of a pen. Didn't even speak or ask anybody as far as Congress. Didn't let anybody as far as the public um, know about it. The mainstream media never covered it, talked about it, just gave away these islands to Russia. All right, continuing. But it's one thing to speculate, it's something entirely different to have hard proof. And while speculation was rife that just like the CIA funded Al Qaeda had been used as the facade by the U.S. to achieve its own geopolitical and national interests over the past 2 decades, so ISIS was nothing more than an Al Qaeda 2.0. There was no actual evidence of just this. That may all have changed now when a declassified secret U.S. government document obtained by the public interest law firm Judicial Watch, God bless them, they do such great work, shows that Western governments deliberately allied with Al Qaeda and other Islamist extremist groups to topple Syrian dictator Bashar al Assad. According to investigative reporter Nafiz Ahmed in Medium, the leaked document reveals that in coordination with the Gulf states and Turkey, the West intentionally sponsored violent Islamist groups to destabilize Assad, despite anticipating that doing so could lead to the emergence of an Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. According to the newly declassified U.S. document, the Pentagon foresaw the likely rise of the Islamic State as a direct consequence of the strategy. All right, we'll be right back and I'll finish up. All right, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to finish this particular story and then comment about how it relates to a couple other things. And then, Olive, if you want to call in, you're welcome to do so. I did talk to my friend Wendy, so afterwards, I'm going to bring her on and let her, in the second half of the show, talk about the Mazzaroth and some of the other things that she wanted to bring forth, which is a very interesting topic. And so I'm glad she was able to finally get on. All right, so let me finish this article real quick. Um, According to the newly declassified U.S. document, the Pentagon foresaw the likely rise of the Islamic State as a direct consequence of the strategy, but described this outcome as a strategic opportunity to isolate the Syrian regime. The Pentagon and the different governments of the world that support these these rebel forces, they know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly how it will destabilize certain regions, how it will lead to greater conflict, how it will um, bring to power certain terrorist elements. They know all of that. They understand the consequences precisely. And, all of these stories that come to the forefront of the public, oh, it was an accident. Oh, we didn't know that, so and so would um, take over this particular region, or that they would overthrow or depose of some dictator that was put into power by them also long ago. It's always that way. That's why it's so important for the public to understand how they do this, because they've got it down. It's a science. It is an exact science to them. They know how to bring dictators to power. They know how to overthrow rulers they don't want in power. They know how to incite rebel forces, to arm them, and to give the to show in propaganda presses, um, to twist the story so that it looks like we're supporting popular movements, and that the the populations of these countries want America to come in and to be involved, that we're the saviors of these people. I mean, they understand exactly what they're doing. All right, continuing. And not just that, as we reported last week, now that ISIS is running around the Middle East cutting people's heads off in 1080 digital quality and Hollywood quality video, the U.S. has a credible justification to sell billions worth of modern sophisticated weapons in the region in order to modernize and replenish the weapons of such U.S. allies as Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Iraq. But that the U.S. military industrial complex is a winner every time war breaks out anywhere in the world, usually with the assistance of the CIA, is clear to everyone by now, except for the American people. What wasn't clear is just how the U.S. predetermined the current course of events in the Middle East. Now, thanks to the following declassified report, we have a far better understanding of not only how current events in the Middle East came to be, but what America's puppet master role leading up to it all was. From Nafiz Ahmed, secret Pentagon report reveals West saw ISIS as strategic asset. Anti-ISIS coalition knowingly sponsored violent extremists to isolate Assad, rollback Shia expansion, originally posted in Medium. All right, this article's almost done. The revelation contradicts the official line of Western governments on their policies in Syria and raised disturbing questions about secret Western support for violent extremists abroad, while using the burgeoning threat of terror to justify excessive mass surveillance and crackdown on civil liberties at home. Among the batch of documents obtained by Judicial Watch through a federal lawsuit released earlier this week is a U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency document, then classified as secret, dated the 12th of August 2012. The DIA provides military intelligence in support of planners, policymakers, and operations for the U.S. Department of Defense and intelligence community. So far, media reporting has focused on the evidence that the Obama administration knew of arms supplies from a Libyan terrorist stronghold to rebels in Syria. Of course they knew. They always know. It's just like with Fast and the Furious, it's giving arms and high-powered weapons to the Mexican drug cartels. They know exactly what they're doing. It's the American people that don't know what's up. All right, continuing. Some outlets have reported the U.S. intelligence community's internal prediction of the rise of ISIS, yet none have accurately acknowledged the disturbing details exposing how the West knowingly fostered a sectarian Al Qaeda driven rebellion in Syria. Charles Shoebridge, a former British Army and Metropolitan Police counter-terrorism intelligence officer, said, "Give the political leaning of the organization that obtained these documents Oh, sorry. I fast forwarded too much. Hold on. All right. Given the political leanings of the organization that obtained these documents, it's unsurprising that the main emphasis given to them thus far has been an attempt to embarrass Hillary Clinton regarding what was known about the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. We know they knew about that as well and allowed it to happen. In 2012, however, the documents also contain far less publicized revelations that raise vitally important questions of the West's governments and media in their support of Syrian rebellion. All right, I'm not going to read the rest of the article. You can look it up for yourself. The name of it is Secret Pentagon Report Reveals U.S. Created ISIS as a Tool to Overthrow Syria's President Assad. All right, and so how does this tie in with some of the other conflicts that we see in the Middle East and other parts of the world, and why violent measures uh, are never going to succeed for peoples of these different countries, and how if they like the Palestinians, their support of Hamas, they don't realize that not all of them, some of them do, but most of them don't. It's just like America. There's some Americans that know we funded the Taliban and Al Qaeda and ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood and even Mexican drug cartels. That we fund all the criminal elements worldwide. But most of the American people do not recognize, do not understand this. And so, um, like in Palestine, the people support Hamas, but they don't realize that Hamas was first started by the Likud party in Israel under Ariel Sharon. That, okay, Olive, go ahead and make your question in the chat room. I'm paying attention and I will answer it as I can. And so, anyways, like in Palestine, the people support Hamas. They don't realize it was started by Ariel Sharon and the Likud party. It was first funded, and that Hamas, they were given money by this Israeli political party, and they first began to open soup houses to feed the people, to provide assistance with getting housing, with building up the infrastructure in Palestine. And it was only after they established a good rapport with the Palestinian people that they then began to send rockets into Israel and to engage in terrorist, um, terrorist incidents. And the people still supported them. And they still do because of the good things that they initially did. And so this is how they always do it. Initially, the Taliban, same thing. Al Qaeda, the same thing. How so many peoples of these regions that are decimated by the governments, from conflicts, foreign invaders, and their lands being occupied. It's the same thing. Um, they do it the same way. And so, just like in the IRA in Ireland, they learned after um, one of the terrorists, he he was the key go-to terrorist over the whole Irish Republican Army in their fight, in their struggle against the British government. They found out that he was a double agent. His name was Steak Knife, and that the British government, when he went public about his, being a double agent, they tried to kill him. They tried to take him out to cover up the story, and so he ran for his life, and he made it known that he was actually working for the British government the whole time, that he was leading terrorist elements in the Irish Republican Army to murder police officers, to attack the civilians in Britain. I mean, and so it's always the same way. It's usually the governments that claim to be fighting against these elements that are funding them as a pretext, again, to point the finger at the boogeyman, to release the jack in the box, and to trick the public into supporting whatever it is, their agenda for war, an invasion of a country, whatever. It's always the same modus operandi. And that's why the IRA, when they learned about this, they gave up their arms and they became a strictly political party. Um, and that's what those people, like the Palestinians, they have to do the same thing. You can't support violent means against these governments because they are the ones that are funding the terrorism. And so, unless you understand this, you are duped into supporting wars of aggression. And it's the same thing with 9/11 here in the United States. How so many um, people joined the armed forces. So many, um, children, even 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, so many people enlisted into the armed forces because they wanted to go fight the terrorists on their own, in their own lands. They bought into the whole propaganda of believing that they were going to fight for their countries and fight for their families, and it's so sad because they've been basically abandoned by their own governments, and so many of them are coming back with long-term disabilities, and they're not being given the proper medical treatment. The VAs are denying them care. They're not being given their benefits, and they're suffering these post-traumatic stress-related, um, illnesses just because they were stop lost and sent over and over for 2, 3, 4 tours of duty when they weren't even allowed the proper rest to maintain some semblance of sanity. And so, anyways, and so that's why it's important that people learn about what's really going on. And so after we come back from break, I'm going to bring on my friend Wendy. Matter of fact, I'll go ahead and bring her on and give her a chance um, to talk about who she is, her website, and stuff like that. Well, maybe I'll do it after break. Um, but anyways, it's such a sad thing because another thing that's not talked about as far as our military veterans is that there's a high level. Many of them are taking their lives every day. There's in excess of 22 veterans that are taking their lives every week. It's a much higher rate than the public. And as I said, they're not getting their benefit. Same thing was done to the Vietnam veterans when they arrived home, and they were called to do things which invaded their dreams, haunted their dreams, caused them to um, struggle with trying to return to a civilian way of life. And think about, the other countries, all the people, like if we were invaded and the occupying forces started kicking in everybody's doors and shuffling through their belongings and um, stealing from them or raping their women or anything of that nature. um, you, People, Americans would take up arms against these any kind of force like this. And it's my opinion that when the whole, as far as the Russian or the Chinese, these UN forces, when martial law ensues, when they have a pretext to take over America, that people are going to take up arms and they're going to fight as hard as they can against such oppression. Um, I know that, most will, that we're not going to just bow down and take it. We're not going to just allow ourselves to be abused. That's why so many have stockpiled weapons and munitions. Um, that's why so many are concerned with events, even like things that are said to be possibly occurring here over the course of this month. Whether it's some kind of comet impact, if that indeed is going to happen, I'm okay with getting taken out that way. Even a nuclear strike, I'm totally okay with um, getting, you know, leaving this plane and this fallen world, this fallen state of being, in such an event. You know, but if I know myself, if I'm here and I have capacity to fight against these armed invading forces, then I most certainly will do what I can, and I'll try to come together in community with those that have similar, like-minded thinking. And I think that these kind of things should already be occurring. People should get to know their neighbors and come together in community with others that um, are taking advantage of the time that we have while there is peace yet remaining. All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, for a second hour. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen. Want to quickly remind the listening audience that Revolution Radio is the largest listener supported, commercial free, corporate free radio network on the internet and in the world. And that we do need your monetary support in order to be able to come to you in the manner that we do as a platform of truth, where we have so many differing opinions from so many different hosts, live, being broadcast live 24/7 on both Studio A and Studio B, and that there's such a wide array of topics and discussion happening that I'm sure you can find many different hosts that you will click with and relate to and enjoy as far as their discussion um, and that we're also trying to expand the satellite, and in order for us to be able to do so, we do need your support, and there are many different packages, items available um, as barter for your financial backing. And so please do go to freedomslips.com, click on the different deals, the bullet drive, the non GMO seed packs, the t shirt coffee mugs, or just donate outright, and allow your Dharma to bless you. That there are um, different levels of support, and that you can even, purchase access to the archives, and in that way support us. Just $5 a month gives you access to all of the shows in MP3 form going all the way back to the beginning of last year. And so we appreciate your fellowship, the dialogue that you share with us, the discourse that we share. Those of you that come on and support all the different hosts in the chat room, and in all the ways that you do, we appreciate you and thank you in advance. Um, I have with me as guest for the second hour my friend Wendy Cooper. Wendy, are you there, sister?
Yes, I am. Hey, Brother Zen.
Oh, you sound really good, and
Oh, good.
I'm really glad. And because Skype is superior for discussion and for being able to do the archives as far as making the show available at later times. So I'm glad we were able to contact in this way. Uh, why don't you, before we continue, if you want to share, I know that you just recently began a website, your contact information, Facebook, anything of that nature that you'd like to share, and then tell the listening audience a little bit about yourself and what you're going to be talking about this evening.
Thanks, Zen. Yeah, the website is thearmoroflight.org, and it's armor spelled ARMOUR. And it's a ministry basically sharing my story. There's a video, and then there's contact page for people that want to reach out with questions or to just share dialogue about any kind of topics that are on there. I speak a lot about spiritual warfare, and I'm getting ready to post a video within the next couple of days on what the Most High has blessed me with in the way of awareness about the Mazzaroth.
Awesome. Sounds great. Um, do you have a contact as far as from that website, or did you want to give out a Facebook or anything, or email address?
Well, the website has a link to Facebook, and then there is an
Okay,
email
cool.
address that is my name, which is Wendy, WENDI, period, copper, like the metal,
Okay.
COPPER, at thearmoroflight.org.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it's been a long time coming. We've been trying to get together to talk about some of what she's going to be speaking on this evening. But everything in its own time. But before we go into the Mazzaroth, can you talk a little bit about where you moved to? Because it sounds just absolutely beautiful, and your lifestyle. Because I'm just fascinated by the whole your kind of disconnect from regular world, and your entrance into the wilderness. It's something we all want to do, really. But
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. My family, we were looking for land and we had some criteria. I wanted moving water and I wanted some acreage and a spring. And we looked at a couple of places and they fell through. And at one, I was disappointed and I just said, Yahweh has something better for us. And we ended up being on a well-trouted large river in Ohio on 5 acres that is like, if you look at the topographical map, it's a heart shape. And all around us is a Seventh-day Adventist youth camp. And the people who built the home, um, they observed the Sabbath, and the people we bought the home from observed the Sabbath. And it was just
That's so
awesome
cool.
how it all fell into place. And so we're going to have chicks. We just hatched chicks in the incubator and built in a chicken coop. And we plan to have goats and keep bees in the spring and a garden in the spring,
Nice. That's awesome. It
depending on
sounds
whether we're going to honor
fantastic.
the Shemitah year or not.
What was that?
Depending on whether we're going to honor the Shemitah year or not.
Right, right, right.
We're researching that.
Yeah. Well, it sounds fantastic, and I know that a lot of people, have always wanted to do that kind of a thing, and for you to actually manifest that, that's a beautiful thing. But all right, let's go into the Mazzaroth. Can you let people know what it is and how you got interested in it? Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Well, the story really began with salvation in 2013 when I had an experience where I received salvation, and it was on Yom Kippur, I realized.
that's so
And I
cool too.
started having an interest in the holy feast days and recognizing that they were Yahweh's holy feast days and they weren't just for the Jews as I had before thought.
Right.
So I started studying different calendars and doing some research on that. And then I had another supernatural spiritual experience was on um, the Ha Gadol in 2014. It was the Sabbath before Passover, which is a high holy Sabbath. And so I really felt that it was imperative that I start studying the feast days. And I'm rebellious, so I didn't get into it as much as I would have liked to right away. And then in February of last year, or this year rather, 2015, um, I had been praying a lot for the people that I love and that I know are deceived by astrology and the New Age metaphysical movement. And it had been a burden on my heart, pretty strong, lots of prayers since 2013. And one morning I woke up and I tried to pull the scripture over into my lap before my feet hit the floor, but that's not always the case. This particular morning in February it was, and I pulled the scripture into my lap and I opened right to Job, and I was like, yeah, I really don't want to read Job this morning. I'll turn to the New Testament, and read something that enlivened me. And then the next morning, the same thing happened. And, there was no marker in the page or anything because I never had read Job. And so the second morning that it happened, I thought I better read Job because when things like that happen, I've learned to pay attention and
Right.
be obedient. So as I read Job, I just burned through it so fast, like a couple of hours, and was trying to glean. You know how he'll give you that energy to kind of devour something and pull what
Right.
you need. And so that's the kind of reading I was doing. And I highlighted one passage in Job, which was Job 38, 31 through 33. I highlighted, well, I'll read it. It says, Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? And I only highlighted Pleiades, Orion, and Arcturus because having come from uh, being 20 years in the New Age deception, I was really steeped in astrology and had psychic abilities, and I was shocked that those star clusters were mentioned in there. And so I highlighted them. I thought, I'll come back to that later. I don't need to focus on that. And so I got a good message from Job. It's a good message about how not thinking I could be the mouthpiece for God in the matters of other people and their spiritual journey, or my own for that matter, but just to follow and to praise Him. And so a couple nights later, I had a dream where in my dream I was walking through these woods that I know really well because I also used to work with a shaman and did different kinds of medicine work. And it was in this woods that we would walk in afterward. And I had my father's family Bible, and it was this big giant Bible with thin pages, and I dropped the Bible and it was all disheveled with leaves and everything, and there was one really large, I think like a catalpa leaf, and it was outlined in gold. And when I pulled up the Bible and I opened it, it was right at Job 38, 31, and 33. But the only thing that was highlighted was Mazzaroth in gold. And I was like, oh, Mazzaroth. So what's that? I never heard of it really. I didn't pay much attention to it when I had highlighted the other things that I was familiar with in that passage. So the next day, I entered a search for Mazzaroth, and I found a lot of information that I had to comb through, but I found some YouTube videos that were really well done. Chuck Misslers and Tim Warner and some other people that are really good researchers that put it together well. And so I just started studying the significance of the story of the gospel and the stars. And in combing through a lot of it, I realized that pyramidology kind of turned the study in early years into almost like a reverence for whoever built the Great Pyramid of Giza. A lot of people, like in the 1700s and 1800s, thought that one of Noah's sons must have commissioned the structure, the specifications, and the building of the Great Pyramid. And my understanding of spiritual warfare and the revelations I've been given by the Most High deter me dramatically from crediting anyone but the fallen ones with the ancient structures. And so I found other people which was difficult to do because a lot of the people that had information about the Mazzaroth, once I would research them for a few hours, I would say, oh, there it is, the Great Pyramid, kind of awestruck, glorifying that goes on, which not to discount their research because, just like anything, there's like a percentage of truth in all of that research, and it's a fascinating study for sure. However, it doesn't ultimately glorify the handiwork of the Most High.
All right, well, go ahead and get into what you learned about it and what the stars tell as far as the story, and kind of your journey in the whole process of learning about the Mazzaroth, what you've come to know now.
Yeah, well, I especially like to make the differentiation about astrology versus astronomy, because astronomy is the study of the heavenly bodies and their glorification of God. Like in Psalms 19, it says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is a bridegroom coming out of his chamber and rejoice as a strong man to run a race. And it says in the end of that, the law of Yahweh is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of Yahweh is sure, making wise the simple. And Paul talks a lot in the New Testament about the perversion of the heavenly bodies to be used for astrology. And there's a huge difference. And I think it's important to note that the IAU between the years of 1922 and 1930, they wanted to signify the brightest stars and rename the constellations, and they broke a lot of them up into like 88 constellations where there were 48, because there are the 12 major constellations that run across the ecliptic, which is a band in like 16 degrees diameter width that runs across the night sky that you can see with the naked eye. You can see those and define those pretty well. And then each one has 3 decans, which when you find the root of like the ancient Accadia and Hebrew and Sumerian words that are not the Greek always, you see that there's a fulfillment by the decans of those major 12. So basically, the IAU wanted to confuse things, I think, and just try to simplify, but it kind of wiped out a lot of the meaning.
Let me
And
make a comment here real quick, Wendy.
yeah,
It For those that don't know, why how astronomy, got perverted is that people started to worship the heavenly luminaries, and making sacrifices to them, even child sacrifice, like the way that they did to Moloch, and so that's what corrupted. But even the Hebrew patriarchs, going all the way back to Adam, they knew about the movements of the stars, and they understood about the constellations and the way, their influence on people's lives, which is what has come to be known as far as astrology. But like, even there's a text called the Assatar, which speaks about Adam being one of the 4 books that he was given when he was banished from paradise and placed in the Garden of Eden, exiled here to the earth, was a book called the Book of Signs, which talked about all of these things. And Enoch, he began to teach Enoch when he was 13 years old, taught him out of
yeah,
the Book of Signs. And that's, what is part of the Book of Enoch, the courses of the heavenly luminaries. But go right
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. The Book of Enoch is something that I researched on this as well, because he testifies that in Enoch, in the first book of Enoch, that he was given heavenly tablets and what
Right.
was written, and he understood everything and was teaching his sons. And so, also Josephus, who wasn't a believer, he was a Jewish historian. He credited as a Seth and his descendants, he said, invented the wisdom of the heavenly bodies, and the pillars of the sons of Seth were reported to have astronomical and scientific information etched on them. And yeah, there's a lot of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism believe that Seth was handed the sacred knowledge of the divine heavenly bodies, and that God named all the stars, and that
Right.
they are used for his work. And after the Tower of Babel is when a lot of the idolatry and the astrology really took off. And like even in 2300 BC, the Sumerian, it's the Gudea cylinders, they call them the tablet of the stars of heaven. And when I was reading through them, I found that they mainly teach of omens and warnings concerning the stars like astrology does.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's like the secret text that they give this warning, And I can't find any place that has documented the translation. They give a warning that any astronomer that translates it and teaches it will die of dropsy and be poor or something. It's like full of curses and omens. It's crazy. But yeah, when I started researching, the names that I was seeing didn't really, I wanted the Hebrew names, and
Right.
it took me a while to find those. And one of the things that clued me into the Hebrew name was I entered Arcturus and searched it out and found that the Hebrew name for Arcturus is Abramelech, which means the father of all nations. And that is in the constellation of Boots, which is in the constellation of Virgo. And of course, Rosh Hashanah and the Feast of Trumpets. Rosh Hashanah is a celebration of creation in the Hebrew calendar, and it's in Virgo. And so I thought that's probably a good place to start. And then when I heard Tim Warner's breakdown of the names and the constellations, I drew from him. You know how when anything you read in the scripture or you compare to something else that you have a revelation about, if you find three different meanings, all three can be applied. It's kind of like a holographic mystery. And so I felt as if Virgo was kind of symbolic of Abraham's seed, because the brightest star in Virgo means seed in Latin, and the next brightest star is Zerah in Hebrew, or Sarah, and it means seed. And the other star means branch. And so perhaps God was pointing out the gospel and the stars to Abraham, letting him know the branch of righteousness was going to come forth from his seed,
Right.
as in the multitudes of the Milky Way, when he talked about it in Genesis, when he pointed and said, can you recount the stars or tell? And I looked up different meanings of tell in Hebrew, and one of them is recount, as in a story. So like a story in the stars.
Mm-hmm.
So it was almost as if God was letting Abraham know that there was a greater story and to be aware of the story of the gospel and the stars. Because Job knew, he said he knew that his Redeemer liveth and that he shall stand and see him. And so even before the scriptures, and before Jesus came in the flesh, people knew there was a Redeemer that was to come, and this is how they knew.
Right.
So in Genesis, when it says, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and for years. Signs means token or perpetual covenant. In Hebrew, it's like the rainbow.
Hey, hold on, Wendy. We'll
Yeah.
be right back, everyone. Hey, everyone. Welcome back. And I know because we had a late start on this topic, we'll go ahead and set up to do another show so that we can explain this in more depth and talk about it more, because I don't want to have to rush, and there's so much to it. And I believe it's very important for people to understand that the story of Yeshua as Savior Messiah, being born of a virgin, how he would crush the head of the serpent, all of that, the Genesis 3:15, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, all of that was written into the stars before his first coming. And, even his second coming was written into the stars. Even how Yeshua's life, his first and second coming, align with these 7 Levitical feast days of chapter 23, Leviticus chapter 23. All of that was written into the stars, which lets you know that Yeshua was not just an ordinary human being, that the stars were laid out by the Most High God, by the Creator, um, to tell the story of His coming. And that's why you know, the Hebrew patriarchs knew about it and understood that he would die on the cross. Even in the Ascension of Isaiah, the whole story of his birth and death, resurrection, all crucifixion, all of that was written into the stars and was understood long before he ever incarnated into the flesh. Can you talk about that? How the the constellations and the zodiac talk about Christ coming into the flesh, and then continue with of course wherever it is that you would like to go with this topic.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. And so I I will give the Sumerian names because they um, indicate the Hebrew origins as well. And all the ancients had a similar story that a serpent had taken over the earth. A virgin would birth a baby to fight the serpent, and the God man would beat the serpent, bringing life and peace back to humankind. So that was like the underlying um, origin of all the constellation names and meanings before the Tower of Babel. Um, and if you want to start with Virgo, means the virgin. And in Hebrew, Greek, and in India, they have different names. In the Hebrew, it's Bethula. In the Greek, it's Parthenos and Kanya in India, but they all mean virgin. And these are going back. You can find the Akkadian and the Hebrew translations. We now have dictionaries. It takes a while, but you can find those names. And I urge everyone, if they do the research, to go and find those instead of the Greek. But so one thing that's really interesting, a decan of Virgo is called coma. And coma is a seated woman nourishing an infant. And coma means in Hebrew the desired one, or the one longed for. And his head is exalted above the mother's head, which means he's exalted above her. And there was an Arabic astronomer that talked about how Alba-Mazar was his name. He was in like the 700s. He talked about how the Persians and the Chaldeans and the Egyptians called the boy Ihezu, with the signification of the word Aiza, which in Greek means the Christ. So while Virgo represents the virgin and she's holding the corn and the wheat, which is the seed, and that the branch will come from the seed of the virgin, this is a story that was common with people in the ancient times before the bastardization of all of this information occurred through astrology and for wicked means. And it's also important to note that using stellarium, which I've done a lot, and I can't wait to do more of it, to verify different holy feast days and different things that went on scripturally. In Virgo, Tishri 1, which is Rosh Hashanah, the new year, Yeshua was born on 9/11 in 3 BC. If you look on the stellarium and you can go back into the dates, and I know there's different Hebrew calendars, and that's a puzzle in itself. But there is, in Virgo, it is what it talks about in Revelation 12, with the woman she's clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet and the crown of stars. And it's interesting to go into stellarium and enter different dates based on scriptural dates and different Hebrew calendars and see what the stars in the heavens show us as far as prophecy. And something that I found that was interesting as well as before 9/11 and 3 BC, Jupiter was crowning Regulus. So Jupiter is representative of the king planet, and it crowned Regulus by moving in a retrograde, like forward and backward motion, 3 times in the constellation of Leo, which is the lion, represents the tribe of Judah, the king triumphant. And then Jupiter and Venus were conjunct in Leo in August of 3 BC. And then many people believe that was the sign that the Magi from the tribe of Dan, who had the knowledge of the Mazzaroth handed down from Seth, from Adam, they were looking for this. And that's when they started out onto their journey to go see Yeshua, the king who was born of the Virgin. And there's an interesting star. There's an interesting website called the Star of Bethlehem. And it shows the Star of Bethlehem as being June 17th, 2 BC, where Venus and Jupiter are conjunct right over where historically Jesus was born. And it's mind-blowing when you look at different people's estimation of dates, and the holy feast days are all coordinated in this. And then you get on Stellarium and you enter different dates and you can see these amazing things in the stars. And one of the things is in Libra during Passover in 32 AD, if you enter 415 32 AD into Stellarium, which is free software you can download, and you enter Jerusalem as the location, during Passover, when Yeshua was crucified, there was a blood moon directly in the center of the scale of the constellation of Libra. And in Libra, it means scales and balance. And the star names all start with Zubin. So the brightest star is Zubin el Ganubi, and it means the price is deficient. And then the next brightest star is Zubin el Kamali, and it means the price that covers or atonement. And then Zubin el Akrabi is the price of conflict or the price of the war. So
Wow.
when I found that on Stellarium, I saw somebody cover it, but it was so quick. When I found it myself, I just cried. I couldn't even believe how amazing it is that he is giving us, like the software we have now. We can check, we can verify these things, and we can check it with the Hebrew calendars from different researchers. And it's just mind-blowing when you reveal it yourself. It really has a powerful effect.
Right.
I look at the stars completely different. My 8-year-old has a telescope, and we're trying to find a spot to set something better up so that we can really embrace all of this with, the times that we're living in, to be able to look for different indicators of things and really cover the scripture on this. Scorpio means kills with a sting, and the bright star in Scorpio is Antares. And if you break that down, anti means against, and Aries is the lamb. So it's against the lamb or the Antichrist. And the tail star is called Lesath, and it's the lawless one. And Shala is a star in the raised tail, the Scorpio, and it means raised tail. And what's interesting is in the constellation of Ophiuchus, it shows a man who is right above Scorpio, and he is wrestling this long, curly serpent, and that's the star cluster Serpens, which is the serpent. And he's keeping it from reaching the crown, which is the Corona Borealis crown. And meanwhile, down at his feet, he is pulling one foot up from the sting of the Scorpio while he's placing the other foot down and crushing its head. So that is like hugely prophetic.
Yeah, that's the whole Genesis 3:15.
3:15.
Right.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so I went along, and I can go through them. A Sagittarius is horse archer or a centaur. And in Greek mythology, the centaur was despised. And then you have in Isaiah, 53:3, it talks about how Yeshua was the despised. He was despised. He was the man of sorrow, and rejected of men. And so as you go through these 12 major constellations and find their root meanings, you can also find scripture easily to support the story that they're telling, and it checks out scripturally. Capricorn is the sea goat, which sounds really weird. How does that work out? But interestingly, it does. The goat is a sacrificial offering, and the sea signifies humanity. And so it's a sea goat. It's the sacrifice, the sacrificial lamb for humankind. The Son of Man comes from the people, and the people are the sea. And so in Capricorn, the bright star is Algedi, and it's our judge, the sacrifice. And Deneb Algedi has a double meaning. It's one star, but it has a double meaning. And the one meaning is regular blood sacrifice, and the second one is scapegoat, carries sins away. And the Yom Kippur ceremony, the ceremony of the Hebrews where they would put their hand on a goat, and they had a sacrificial goat to Yahweh, and then they had a scapegoat that was like the Azazel goat, where they would confess all their sins, put their hands on the goat, and then they say a fit man. I guess you got to wrestle the goat out of the village to carry it far away and make sure it never comes back. And so that's interesting. And in Leviticus, it talks about, Aaron shall cast lots upon the two goats. One is for Yahweh and the other is for the scapegoat. And Aquarius is the water bearer, and it doesn't have any known star names, and it's kind of a faint constellation. But Aquarius in Hebrew means Delai, and it's water buckets or wine buckets. And so it represents in the mnemonic, like if you find an ancient star map pre-1900s, you can see a lot of the classical drawings around them, because basically they didn't have television. So they went outside and they were taught this. It was passed down generation to generation, and they would go out and look and see the bright stars and do like line drawings, like the first cave drawings, like pictographs of the lines. So then in these star maps, they make like a classical drawing embellishment so that you can get the idea of the story. And it's really interesting to have one of those if you're going to research this, because it really helps to visualize how the story is coming together and how they were taught and what they see in the scripture, verifying it. But the water buckets and wine buckets, in it's representational of the great man pouring out the living water, because you can see this man pouring out this water, and it's flowing down onto these fishes that are for like living water for them to live in, and that's the constellation of Pisces. And the support for that is Numbers 24/7. You can find where he talks about the living water, and in Isaiah 44:3, pouring out his living water. And then Pisces also it's not a known, it doesn't have any known bright stars, and it's also a faint constellation, but it ties in with Aquarius. And in Hebrew meaning, it's dagim, which is plural for fish. It's fishes. And the fish are held by a band, which are joined, like the bands come together in Cetus, which is the monster, and it represents evil and death. And then if you look at the mnemonic drawings of it on a star chart, you can see that Aries, the lamb or ram, has its hoof, like breaking the bonds free with its hoof. And it's just cool to see like he's freeing the fish from the evil death of the monster, and in cooperation is Aquarius pouring out the holy living water.
Let me make a comment here because we're almost to the end of a show, and Truthy had mentioned that the 23rd of September 2017, that this represents the sign that is written in Revelation 12, where it speaks about the woman, the virgin clothed with the sun, with the moon beneath her feet, a child within her womb, and a crown of 12 stars. That represents the constellation of Leo and the nine. I think it's nine different. I mean, three different planets and the nine stars of that constellation. And how this is significant is because Yeshua, when he comes again, he's supposed to fulfill the fall feast, and one of those is the Feast of Trumpets, which occurs on September 23rd. And so how that plays into that particular date is going to be very interesting. Let me get you to comment on that.
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of research on that recently. I did cover that a couple of months ago because I wanted first to get an understanding of what was going on. I do know that I did listen to Gil Broussard talk about not only his thoughts on the solar eclipse lasting for 3 hours during a blood moon during Passover in 32 AD, which is impossible because the moon and the sun are on opposite sides of the ecliptic, and he has a chronology of the date that this planet 7X passes through and causes earthquakes and perturbations of planets and pole differences. And I heard him talk about that somewhat, and I do feel that there's a lot that's been hidden in not only the information of the meaning of the Mazzaroth, but by NASA, they have technology that is so far beyond our comprehension of what we would even imagine possible that I wouldn't be surprised if there was a lot going on in the heavenlies that is going to cause a lot of things to shift and fulfill the end time prophecies. I I feel that there are a lot of things that need to occur prophetically, but I don't know what kind of time frame that we're really looking at. But
Mm-hmm.
it is a wise thing to get an understanding of the heavenly bodies and the Mazzaroth and the significance of them according to Scripture. And then I feel like it's important to do that and spring forth into the future with some better discernment, because I don't know. I just really want to have a thorough understanding of things before I project things to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very wise. And I don't know how that's gonna play out. It is encoded in Revelation 12, and I definitely think it's gonna be something interesting. As far as whatever occurs on that particular day. But how what that means, we really won't know. But Wendy, why don't you join me next week and let's continue again with what we're talking about here. And before we finish the show, which we only got a minute remaining, can you give out your information once more?
Oh, sure, thanks. It's thearmoroflight.org. Armor is spelled ARMOUR. And my contact email for the site is Wendy, WENDI, period, copper, like the metal, COPPER, at thearmoroflight.org.
So do you have availability for next week then?
I believe that I do. I'll make
You can
sure
let me
and
know.
get back with you tomorrow
Okay.
because there's a lot in the hopper, but I will
Yeah.
verify it and get back with you within the next 24 hours.
All right. Well, even if we can't hook it up for next week, we'll do so very soon, and we'll bring forth more information on the Mazzaroth because, as I said, even in the hour that we were able to talk about it, it is a fascinating subject. And it's one that people should be aware about because, again, as we said, the whole story of Yeshua, his incarnation, even his second coming,
Oh,
are
yeah.
all prophetically encoded into the stars. And they had to have been aligned in such a way that they would, you know, align with his birth, death, crucifixion, and resurrection. And so that in itself is just amazing. It means that the Creator preordained and established all that long,
Yeah.
long, long before his coming and incarnation in the flesh.
It's a it's awesome how sovereign and how good he is to give us all this information and to have it in such a glorified manner and just such a beautiful poetry of it when you get into it. And as you progress through the signs, it does talk.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
The Grand Highway is crowded with lovers and searchers and leavers, so eager to please and forget. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen. I appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. And I had a friend that was going to come on and speak to you about the Mazzaroth and talk about how the constellations um, they tell a story that there's the all of the different signs of the zodiac, how all of them together, when you understand the background behind them, they tell a story um, that helps one to understand the believe it was the state government of Puerto Rico, even though Puerto Rico is not a state, but the regional government of that island, it went bankrupt. And we have all of many of uh, the European nations having difficult times in managing their fiscal debt. Welcome, Lady Horse and Mr. Rowe and Herbal and Daku and Olive and Crystallize and Monster and Truthy, Zippy, Count Cranula, Olive, Cortec, Causation, all the rest of you that are in the chat room that are not in the immediate scroll. Welcome and thank you for joining us. And so, those of you that have some idea as to possibilities, let's talk about it. Let's see what you know. This will give you an opportunity to inform the rest of the community here on things you might have read or studied or know about. I personally have been focused, with a one-track mind and with all of my effort on the newest book that I've been working on, and I am glad to announce that I'm close to being done with it. That I have been numbering and formatting the course, the destiny, the fate of humanity and world. Um, and, as far as the prophetic nature and our being last generation and all that. But um, she, I haven't spoken to her today, and so um, we're not going to cover that this evening. And so I thought what I would do is take some phone calls from you and give you as a listening audience a chance to talk about some of the happenings, those things which are cited to occur in this month. Supposedly, this is supposed to be this month is supposed to be a lot of events are portend to occur over this month, and some of those people believe that there might be some kind of celestial event, that there is a possible comet impact, or and I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but and this is not the only thing, but there's some discussion out there in the conspiracy world, um, that some people actually believe that this is going to happen, and that there are things like the Simpsons episode and other things that people feel like chapters even today. And currently it is about 400 pages if you consider the size of my other books, which are a 6x9 format. But I've decided, hello Noreen, um, I've decided to publish it in 14-point font and to utilize letter size pages, which is 8.5 by 11.5, I believe. And formatting it in that way, it's 200 plus pages. And so it won't be long at all. Anyways, so I've got a couple things that I will talk about in connection to some of the, you know, supposed possibilities as far as events that could occur. Um, I've got a number, because in the last book that I was working on prior to this one, um, okay, just a few minutes, Olive, and you're welcome to call in, brother, and yeah, just give me a chance to talk about a couple things, and then I'll take calls for those that are interested. But anyways, and so in the last book that I was working on prior to this one, um, it was based on the war in heaven, and I had compiled from a lot of a myriad number of sources, that this kind of thing is going to happen and that it's right around the corner. And you know that I'm not one of those that gets involved in the whole gloom and doom as far as you know the world's gonna end. Not Chicken Little, running around screaming, "The sky is falling, the sky is falling." And even though I prophetically believe that things are going to continue to get difficult for humanity, and that there's certainly no golden age waiting around the corner or the bend. I hope that there is, but according to not just the biblical scriptures, because I study all things, um, that even like with the Colburn Bible and other books, the Hopi prophecies, things of that nature, it seems to point to things becoming difficult before we ever are to reach a point where we have peace and joy and goodwill and nothing to sweat and nothing to really have to worry about, even with the pressing debt that at some point all of that is going to come due. That things are being pushed and strung along, that the politicians and governments, we just had